There we go. All right. Well, let's get going.
Um,
Welcome, Chicago. We're going to do the virtual mug for this one. This is February 2025. Thank you so much to everybody that's here. A special hello to all of our Chicagolanders who we occasionally get to see in person, but also thank you to everybody else who is joining from around the world remotely. It's great to be able to share this content and share this opportunity with everybody. So we're very excited about that. A couple of rules that we have here in Chicago. We try very hard to make this a safe space for everybody to be able to ask questions, feel comfortable sharing use cases. So we do ask that you not reach out to attendees outside of the session without their permission. Please, no self-promotion or pitching of folks. We, like I said, want this to be a safe space for everybody. So we appreciate your cooperation in making this a comfortable place to engage and share thoughts and ideas. We are recording today's session. So if there is information you want to go back and revisit, there's also going to be some links and things shared throughout the session. So that content will be available. We work with the Adobe team to get that posted after the fact. And so we'll be sharing out an email with a link to that video recording and to the slide deck. Hopefully today or tomorrow, as quickly as Adobe can help us get it loaded. So it's usually about a 1-day turnaround, but we'll get that out to you pretty quickly. A couple quick things that wanted to just call out outside of ShyMug. For anyone who is interested, there is a Women in Tech virtual users group now that has launched very recently, and they have a session tomorrow. That is a virtual users group, and that session is focused on AI and Marketo Engaged. You can find that on mugs.marketo.com or scan the QR code to get there. We also have Adobe Summit coming up really fast. If you aren't registered yet, you're probably not going in person, would be my guess, because we're getting a little bit close on that. But there is a ton of content that is going to be available virtually, both in real time and recorded after the fact, including a session presented by the wonderful Chiara Riga, who is joining us today, and a number of other sessions put on by Marketo champions, former champions, and members of the product team over at Adobe and Marketo. So a few ones to check out and keep on your radar for the end of March. That's really all I have for announcements for today. So I am going to turn it over to our speakers. We are so thrilled to welcome Shannon MacQuarrie and Chiara Riga from Appfolio to walk us through today's session on email. Ladies?
Thanks, Brooke.
Thank you. Get started here. So today we're going to be talking about from inbox to impact strategies for email operations success. Chiara and I have a couple of topics we want to talk about. Then we are definitely going to cover stuff you need to know on server reputation, maintaining a marketable database, and how to report on your showcases and showcase your winnings to stakeholders. And then we're going to have time at the end for questions. So starting us off here, a little introduction. I'm Shannon. I live in Seattle, and I've been working for Appfolio for a little over 2 years. I am focused on the customer segment at Appfolio, so you'll be hearing more about my specific use cases on customer things because I find that exciting. And then on a personal note, I have just traded out a lot of New York activities, such as eating out a lot with friends and checking out parks, to a lot of Seattle outdoor activities, and hoping for the weather to get a little less dreary here so I can get back into paddleboarding. And Chiara, go ahead.
Hi, so I'm Chiara Riga-Zhao. I am a 5-time Marketo champion. In 2021, I was champion of the year. I have been certified and working in Marketo pretty much since I graduated college, about 10 years now. And I work with Shannon at Appfolio. My job is more marketing kind of life cycle stuff as well as platform operations. And I live in Santa Cruz, California, so very blessed to be walking distance from the beach. And I love to read and, just like Shannon, be outdoors, especially with my husband and our dog Scout.
I love seeing Scout on our Zoom calls. All right, so for today's agenda, we're going to be covering a couple topics. We're going to start with building and maintaining your sender reputation. Then we're going to talk about maintaining a marketable database. email best practices and personalization, email reporting, and creating your personalized action plan, and then wrapping up with Q&A. So Chiara is going to kick us off with building and maintaining your sender reputation.
Yep. So there's a lot that can be done here for your sender reputation. Obviously, this is the foundation of anything that you're going to be doing with email, right? Because you can make the most personalized email with the most catchy subject line possible, but if it's landing in spam, you're not going to achieve what your goal is with that email. So the first thing you want to focus on is your basic email stuff, right? SPF, DKIM, DMARC, etc. That should be set up when you set up Marketo, but I've heard from many, many consultants that it is often not set up as intentionally as people think. So definitely something worth just making sure. And then another layer of authentication that we went through last year or maybe 2 years ago at Appfolio that's really helped us is BIMI, which stands for Brand Indicators for Message Identification. So what this does is when our emails hit an inbox, if it's sent either from Marketo or from anyone internally, we have a little blue check next to our email address, and the icon shows the Appfolio logo. And it's just an extra layer of like authentication for your email, which can really help, prioritize your emails for the systems that recognize BIMI, which is quite a few of them. Um, so the next thing you want to think about is IP warming. Anytime you add a new email domain or sender IP, you're going to want to make sure to start sending your messages from it very slowly for the first few weeks. So start off with just a few messages to a very small core group of people who are already engaged with you, and then start broadening it very, very slowly. And the length of time and the amount of people in your database is, those are going to inform each other, right? If you have a very, very small database, you probably don't need as much time as like Appfolio with our several million records in our system. So that's something you also want to keep in mind. Next thing, keeping your lists clean. I know this can sometimes, as operations folks, be a bit of an uphill battle with your marketing stakeholders, but it is so important to focus on quality over quantity here. If people are not engaging with your emails, there is a chance that they've left that company and that company has turned their email into a honeypot, for example, where whenever someone sends an email to that person, then they know, okay, that person has left the company. Whoever sent that email doesn't actually know them and puts you on spam lists, right? And so it can really affect your reputation if you are not making sure to keep those invalid and inactive records from your lists. There are email validation tools that can help with this. Strike Iron is one that we use. There's also Neverbounce. I know there's more of them. Those can definitely help you validate that an email domain is legitimate, an email address can return a response, etc. But that is very, very important, but it does not replace making sure to keep your list clean, keeping only engaged people in your emails, etc. The next thing you want to focus on is making sure to keep your communication consistent. If you're usually sending 2 emails a week and you all of a sudden send 7, that's going to overwhelm an inbox. You're going to get a lot more likely to be marked as spam, right? So you want to make sure you keep a rough cadence. It doesn't have to be always, we send on Wednesdays at 5 p.m., but that is, the more consistent it is, the better it will be for your emails to land in the inbox. You can also use communication limits to avoid over emailing, but ultimately you just want to keep an eye on your metrics and make sure like, okay, if we want to go from 2 emails a week to 3, let's test it for a little while and see if that's changed any of our metrics before we continue, moving forward with this.
Chiara, we've got a couple quick questions.
Sure.
For authentication, BIMI, is that a free service or a paid service?
It is not directly through Marketo. It is a paid service for the hosting and the kind of authentication. It was not expensive when we went through it. I don't want to give you an exact number, but I remember it being in the four-figure range. It was not for like a year. So it's not something crazy expensive, but it isn't free.
Thank you. And the other question we had was on IP warming. For a new subdomain with a shared IP, is it still important to warm up the subdomain?
If the subdomain is brand new and you've never used it for mass emails, I probably would still. If you've used it, like let's say you're moving from HubSpot to Marketo, you're on a shared IP, you used this subdomain before, probably not totally necessary, but I always think to err on the side of caution with things like that. If you end up on a spam list, it's pretty tough to get off it.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, and then the last point I had here was avoiding sending from a no reply. You want to really think about the experience of the people that you're emailing to with all of this stuff, right? So if people get an email that they can't reply to, they're a lot more likely to mark it as spam. And the more people marking your emails as spam, the more these ISPs are going to not put your emails in the inbox, right? So the way we manage this is we don't want to get a bunch of these reply tos to anyone's personal email or anything like that. So we have a list of sender aliases, some more generic, some of them look like real people, but they are an alias for that person so that someone from the MOPS team can go in and check those emails. And we even have, Drift email helps us manage that. But it helps us to monitor those and reduce frustration and friction on the user end, which can help keep your sender reputation healthy. So that's what I've got there. And then I think I am handing it off to Shannon to talk about maintaining a marketable database.
Yeah, thanks, Chiara. That was amazing. I learn something every time you talk. So talking about maintaining our marketable database, there are a few big topics I want to touch on. One is global form validation. So taking some of the work off the back end of cleaning up our database, how can we clean records as they come in, and using this as an opportunity to gate those, making sure email addresses are valid. Using communication limits, which Chiara touched on briefly about that consistent messaging, and making sure that you're cognizant of how many emails a day and a week you're sending. Leveraging marketable segments to make sure you're sending to your engaged audiences. And then also including a subscription center on your unsubscribe page. This is a great option to really meet your audience where they're at. If you direct them to an unsubscribe page, maybe they are looking to fully unsubscribe, but why not give them the opportunity to maybe opt into your customer survey panel or just your newsletters? I've also seen really cool examples where you can say, oh, can you pause my emails from this company for, 2 months, and just give them a bit of a breather. So there's a lot of options there that give you a chance to not fully lose that connection, but we want to be, respectful of what people want to be receiving from us to, make sure our delivery rates are still high and our unsubscribe rate stays low. So we're going to dig in a little bit to the global form validation option. There's a lot of great options here for if you are just starting or if you want to build on top of what you already have gated. It's set up in your admin section under global validation rules, and you can create a series of rules here. I recommend checking out Adobe's resources here because they have some great ones to get started with to make sure you're just getting valid email addresses in, and things like excluding @test are pretty easy to just give you a good leg up to get started. Then from there, what I would recommend is taking a look at your database and seeing what you're cleaning all the time. If there's reoccurring issues with email address types, maybe go ahead and gate those. And the opportunity here is you can add an error message to explain why you're blocking that email and kind of soften that experience. So that way the person doesn't just get a rejected message, but they know that you're looking for a business email or something of that nature. Something I'll also call out is maybe you don't want to block your competitors completely, but it's a good chance to take a look at if you want to handle those addresses differently once they enter your system. Something else here is setting our communication limits. This is something I'm very aware of on the customer side. So you can also set this up in your admin section under comm limits. You can set your per day and your per week. You kind of have two options here, but it really starts with thinking about how many emails do you want to send. sounds a little basic, but are you comfortable starting off with an email a day every day of the week? Or are you like, that feels heavy, let's start with 3 a week? And if you're going to start by sending, 5 emails, 1 per day a week, then think about looking into your unsubscribe rates. If those are peaking later in the week, that's a really good indication that that's too much and they don't quite have the appetite for that many emails. Then you can ratchet it back. We exist somewhere in the 3 days a week we think is good. And something I've run into that I'll just flag to save you guys the time is if you're sending bigger bunches of emails, like a big list for your newsletter, etc., early in the week, and you do that your first couple of days, you're going to exhaust that audience and they're not going to qualify for later in the week emails. So if you have a really targeted send that's really relevant to that segment, maybe think about prioritizing that earlier in the week or just being cognizant of that big send earlier in the week that's hitting those 3 days already. And that's something that we have a team that partners with us to look at our email calendar, and they're very aware of the strategy behind that. But if that's something that lies on your automation team, maybe just give it a look and make sure it's a little bit more balanced throughout the week. Another great call out here is that if there's a subset of your audience that you want to target less, you can handle that through smart lists and marketing suspends if you think that most of your audience has a larger appetite, but maybe you want to be more sensitive to certain viewers. So marketable segments. This is an awesome place to get started if you don't have one yet, or I've got a couple inspiration ideas for if you've got the marketable segment handled, but maybe you're looking about where you want to expand to more segments. So segments are created in your database section in your instance, and you can create a series of new segmentations. Again, I'm going to hype the resources that Adobe has because they're really great at explaining how the drafts work and approved drafts work. If you've never created a segment before, I recommend giving that a look because there are some details to how to set that up properly. And then once you've done that, I would consider a marketable segment, customer and prospect, which we do. Industry is really helpful. And then an ICP or an ideal customer profile, as well as geography, which we'll talk about a little bit later. To get started with the marketable segment, I wanted to give you guys some finite things that we use and that I've found to be helpful just to get you started. But it's really going to take, looking at your database to see what you consider someone to be marketing valid. So for us, it'd be email invalid is false, marketing suspend also false, block listed false, unsubscribe false, and email address is not empty. And then there's probably a lot more filters on top of that you could think to add for your unique instance. And then for the customer segment, I love working on this with my team because there's a lot of different data points you can look at. One that we have is we have our customers logging into their portal. So a great indication for us if they're active and engaged is if they've logged in the last year. We also have a lot of statuses we can look at. Depending on what CRM you use, you might have Salesforce type as customer, that's what we use, or another type indicator of that sort. We also look to make sure that they're not archived and they're currently active. So maybe working with other teams and PMs to see what the best data points are to define your most, active customers.
Shannon,
yes, Brooke.
we have a question. Would you recommend an email governor, a smart campaign to prioritize the high value emails on top of the comms limits?
Oh, that's a great question. Chiara, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if your marketing team is at a point where you have all of your emails set so far in advance that you can kind of manage request campaigns in one campaign and just send your whole audience through and see which ones they qualify for and things like that, that's great. I think it's probably a little more effort than it needs to be if you could just work with your marketing team on maintaining the calendar that aligns with high value touches earlier in the week and understanding their audiences and things like that so that you don't have to build such an extra step essentially in your process. I don't think it hurts, but I don't think it's necessary. But that's my 2 cents. Everyone's going to have a different thought on that.
Great, thank you.
Perfect. So moving on, we're going to be talking about our email best practices and really everything you could want to know about personalization. So starting off with our email best practices, we've got 4 good starter items here to think about. Number 1 is going to be our email image size. We don't want our image to be blocking our emails. That's an easy no-brainer. Take care of that right away. So things you want to think about is your quality, image file size, using your alt text descriptions on emails, as well as the text to image ratio. On top of that, number two, establishing a really good email QA practice. This is something I picked up from Appfolio and have learned a lot from because my team is amazing at this. It's a great chance to check for copy and design errors, anything with the rendering. And then on top of that, looking at links, making sure they're directing where you think they're going to be, checking out those UTMs. If that's something you're included, are those set up properly and are they added to every link? And then something we'll talk about a little bit more down the line is with those custom elements, previewing for each individual record to make sure you really know what the experience the individual is receiving if you're going to be customizing off of them. Number three is standardizing pre-headers. This one is huge. There's only so many things we have control over that help with our open rates, and it's really our subject line and our pre-header. So we want to make sure it's consistent with our brand messaging and that we're using them. Something I forget about sometimes is that if you don't set your pre-header, the server that's receiving your email can set what text they want to preview for you. And that's such a miss. If we have control over so few things, we definitely want to make sure we're using that as an opportunity to continue to explain the hook of the subject line and why it is relevant to the person receiving the email. And lastly, we have eliminating spammy subject lines. I hope this is a no-brainer, but we do want to hook those audiences. We want to tell them why this email has reached their inbox, especially if we're segmenting and it's, we've put all this thought into the strategy of who's going to receive this email. But we don't want to get carried away and we don't want to make it look spammy. That's of course not good. We don't want to be put in the spam folder. As Chiara mentioned, once you're in, it's tricky to get out. So avoiding too many emojis or anything that sounds too spammy.
Shannon, do you have a recommended tool for checking spammy words in subject lines?
Oh, that's a good question. We have a great copy team that works on that. So they might. Chiara, do you know if we have a tool for that?
I don't think we have a tool. I think it's more just kind of a gut check, right? We all know what a spammy email looks like in your inbox. There are probably like something to work with your copy team on to create guidelines for your brand. And it's going to be dependent on your audience, right? I used to work in cybersecurity. They were a lot more sensitive to a spammy headline than or spammy than whatever it is we're sending at Appfolio now. So I think it depends on your audience. I would say if you think you're getting stuff from your copy team that is spammy, do some A/B tests on it and show them with data that like, hey, this is not resonating. But yeah, I don't know of any tools, though they might exist. I don't know, Brooke, if you know of any.
A lot of what I've seen out in the space is a lot of the things that used to be the quote unquote taboo keywords, for example, are less effective, more so than some of the other things like the authentication, engagement with previous emails, email reputation for your sender IP, as opposed to whether somebody put free or an emoji in there. So it's a really good question. I don't know of anything off the top of my head though. Brian added into the comments that Litmus and others have subject line checkers. So I would assume then probably Litmus, Validity, Email on Acid. Those are the ones that come to mind for me in that category. So we just had one more question about emails too. Was if there's an ideal image to text ratio too to help with the spam prevention.
Yeah, I think that Litmus is also a tool for that. I know our design team works on that. I don't know off the top of my head what the ratio is, but I did see some resources online talking about having it be balanced, which makes sense.
I've always heard like 60/40, but with the 60% being text, you definitely don't want more image than text from what I understand.
I always heard a good rule of thumb with subject lines too is to identify if it's a promise, a proof, or a threat. So like if you don't, this will happen. If you do, this will happen. Or this, someone did this and this happened are kind of your most actionable subject lines. And you want to keep your threat subject lines to probably 10% of your total subject lines. They're less effective. But thinking about it as a promise, a proof, or a threat helps you identify what the action is of the subject line and kind of run it from there. So that's my methodology that's been go-to for years and has served me well, if that's useful for anyone else.
I love that, Andy. Thank you.
A promise, proof, or a threat. That makes sense. The other I would add is emojis. Someone on my team did an awesome project where they went through and tested all the emojis that we used in our subject lines to make sure that they were rendering on different, iOS options, whether that be email, desktop, phone. And that's a great way to make sure it doesn't look spammy too, is having the control over what that looks like when it comes through. Great. Okay, so moving on to email personalization, because we want to drive engagement, of course. So things we're going to be talking about today is segmenting our database, which we've talked about here a little bit already. We want to make sure that we have segments to offer information to them, to our audience, based off of what they want to be seeing and why it's relevant to them. We're going to customize through tokens. There's a million options to be tokenizing here. Something I'm going to call out now is just the reply to address. And Chiara had mentioned that, is that you can either send from a sales rep, maybe an alias, lots of different ways to customize through your reply to. There's also many options when it comes to personalizing through links, whether that's using that segmentation to drive them to specific web pages that they're most interested in, or if that's personalizing the link specifically within the link, which we'll talk about more. Chiara's going to tell us a little bit about serving dynamic content and how snippets can be used. And then something I want to call out is sending by individuals' time zones. This depends on your company and who you're sending to. But of course, we're putting in all this work on these emails. We want to make sure they're not being delivered in the middle of the night. Chiara.
All right, thanks, Shannon. So first thing I'm going to talk about is our two options for personalization when we use a segment. Or segmentation, excuse me. So Shannon talked at the top about segmentations and, a marketable segment, a customer versus prospect segment, all kinds of things like that, how they're created in database. Those kinds are great for defining your audience, but there's also real use in creating a geography segment, a segmentation, a persona segmentation, things like that, because it allows you to use dynamic content in order to show. You could have three different people, like the image shows at the bottom, each of them seeing a different email that's all sent from the same campaign, depending on where they fall as a persona within your geo, etc. And you can apply that to an email body, email subject line, etc. And then we have snippets, which are essentially dynamic content, but rinse and repeat. So those are created in Design Studio. You can put images in them, tokens, all kinds of things like that. And those can be just inserted into any email or, I believe, landing page that you want. So if we go to the next slide, let's talk about creating dynamic content. So when you are editing an email, you're going to want to find the segment or the piece that you'd like to make dynamic and click into it. In this case, it's the subject. And I've kind of put a red box around the make dynamic box. So it's like a solid square with an outline square. Once you've selected that, it'll prompt you to select the segmentation you'd like to use. And then from there, you can see on the right sidebar each different segment on the side. When you select each segment, it'll let you edit the content for that specific segment. So let's say in the US, we want specific content. In Australia, we want something different. You're able to edit that content in any different kind of element within your email, including that subject line. So that can be really, really powerful. Like, let's say we have a white paper and we know three different personas are going to be interested in it, but for three different reasons. We could segment the email by those personas and show different content without having to create three different email programs, three different smart lists, three different everything. We just create one and Marketo handles the rest. So it's a really great way to scale personalization. Then if we go to the next slide, we can talk about creating snippets, which also is another great way to scale personalization, right? So these are created in Design Studio. Just go to New and then New Snippet. From there, you'll see a segment by button. You click that button, and then again, you'll choose which segmentation you want to use for it. And then from there, you can edit the snippet for each different, again, segment within that segmentation. Ways that I've seen this used really effectively was at a previous company, we had very specific footer information that needed to be shown to different geographies for e-privacy purposes. And so we were able to do this via snippet and then just include that snippet into all of our emails. So then instead of having to update that for every email we send, for dynamic content, for instance, if we did it just dynamically, then we would have to edit every single email template or email program template that we used. Instead, we can just use that snippet and update that anytime there was a change needed. Another really cool way I've seen this used is by doing geography and using it to promote events in that region, right? So let's say, at Appfolio, we focus 100% in the US, but let's say we have West region events, Central, East Coast, Midwest, etc. We could have a segmentation for those blocks and then have the most high priority events that we want to promote inside of that snippet. And each time that event passes, just replace it with something else. Or if there's nothing in that location, replace it with a white paper that you want them to use. And that's a really great way to, promote the most high value things in region that can really help, increase engagement and personalize things at a really at scale. So now I'll hand it back to Shannon to talk about some really cool ways that she has developed personalization at Appfolio.
Amazing. Thanks, Chiara. Those snippets are so cool and powerful. That was endless options there. So I wanted to give you guys an example of something we do at Appfolio that is one of my favorite projects I've worked on. It is either going to serve as, inspiration for you guys if you have a book a meeting tool that your reps use, or if you don't, hopefully just get the gears turning about how you could be personalizing your links in different ways. So our goal here was when we send emails, we want to send them from the recipient sale owner and the reply to and from address in a tokenized way. And then in the body of the email, we wanted to drive our leads to the sale owner's personal calendar. So, you can imagine your Zoom link or your meetings, Teams link, you have like a personal room. We have a tool set up like that where you can use, Calendly, SalesLoft, maybe Chili Piper through Gong, one of those providers, and they can drop unique meeting links to the reps for their individual people that they own. So we've decided to do this using a velocity script. And the reason we did that is because we didn't want to put the initiative of maintaining like field accuracy. If say we were to use like the user object in Salesforce to keep track of all those links, that really puts a lot of trust in that getting updated as reps come and go, and maybe those links change. And automation didn't have a lot of visibility into if any of those links were breaking until something went wrong. So we wanted to skip that route and go the velocity script route so that we could control the links. But there's a couple different ways to do this for sure. So the experience that we were driving, you can see here on the screen, we've got an email coming from the sales owner or a default person, who in this case is going to be me. And then we're going to drop a nice bold CTA of schedule here. That's going to direct them to the person's calendar. And it's the unique person's calendar with time to book. And then you can see at the end, I've also tokenized a little, sign off saying this is from, in this case, Shannon, or it would be the sales owner. So how do we actually go about doing this? We're going to learn a little bit about velocity script here. We're going to keep it broad enough so that if you're not familiar with velocity, you can start thinking about how you do it. And hopefully there's enough detail here that if you do use it, you can kind of think about what fields you'd want to use and how you could set it up. So what we've done here, it's a great project because you get to partner with a lot of different teams. There's the automation piece, but there's also the sales piece, which for me is really fun. So the first thing that I did is I worked with the sales team to create a specific meeting type. So I labeled it something broad like marketing emails, meetings booked. The reason you want to create a specific meeting type is you don't want the reps to accidentally send meetings from this. You want to make it clear it's just for emails to keep attribution clear. And then we're going to have this be the only meeting type that we're using in our email blasts. Once you create this specific meeting type, you're going to generate the custom links for all the reps participating. So a little caveat here, if you have like a rep team of 500 people, this probably isn't scalable for that many people. But if you have, for me in customer, I have a lot of different growth teams. So maybe a list of 10 to 20 reps, that's very manageable. And so you're going to have 10 to 20 links in that case, because it's going to be inserting all of their specific links, which I'll get into a little bit more here. So you're going to start off by doing that. And this is the piece where you're going to align more closely with the sales team. You want to make sure they know that these emails are being sent on their behalf. So that way the reps aren't confused when these meetings are coming with this unique meeting type, especially if you work with someone, on like sales ops or something to get that meeting type created. And so you're going to align with sales. You're going to create those custom links for each of the reps, and you're going to keep them in a doc so you can maintain as people come and go and keep those all up to date. So now you're ready to create your new token. We'll get into the script here in a moment. And something I want to call out is that, as you saw on the first page of this, the nice bold CTA to schedule here, I think it's worth investing the time in creating one of those with design, or if that's something you're comfortable doing, because you're leveraging this skill. But you can also do like a hyperlink text for schedule here too, if that's more on brand for how you like to send your emails. So to create the velocity script, what you're going to do is you're going to go to the level you want to create it at. Ours is at a high level in our marketing activities, so it's inherited in all the programs. In this example here, they're doing it in the testing email template, and they're dragging in an email script token into the My Token section. And then you get the script editor here. You can see on the right-hand side, the little check boxes. Those are all the fields you're going to be using. So in this example, it's sales owner's first name and sales owner's last name. And I call this out because if you don't check them, the script will break, and that may or may not have happened to me a few times. So good to keep in mind. So we're going to do some basics of velocity script here. Again, I'm just going to walk you through kind of like what the script looks like and how you can start to think about how to formulate this. And it's very scalable, in my opinion, on the customer team. So you're going to start with your comments. You've got, if you're a nice coder, you always comment out your work. Some do, some don't. I try to. And so in this example, we're going to say hashtag, this token will send calendar scheduling links based off of ownership using the sales owner field. Then you're going to have your opening if statement. So if the lead sales owner is John Smith, output for your if statement, go ahead and send John Smith's unique meeting link. And then you're going to have your else value. So in this case, it's going to be our default link. So say that someone is unowned in your system, hopefully not, fingers crossed, but you don't want to send a broken link and you don't want to send an empty link. So you can go ahead and choose your default there. So if you take a look at this middle section here, I'm going to read you through it a little bit so you get a better sense of the different pieces. You're going to start off by using the lead owner field to determine which meeting link will be added. So in this one, that light blue, lead.salesowner _C, which is just the API name we're working with for the sales owner. Then the end of the meeting link contains a specific email meeting type that we talked about in that darker blue. That's the one that you create to distinguish these meetings that are booked from this email program versus the ones that are being sent out independently by the reps. You're then going to look at the underline section for those personal link, and this token is going to insert the personal links for sales rep based on their ownership. And if the recipient is unassigned, the bolded default scheduling link value will be populated. In this case, meetingsforshannon.com or Shannon MacQuarrie at marketing emails. And then the nice seafoam green color, the book a meeting token you've got is ready, and you can insert it in your email CTA, which you can see on the right side for schedule here. I really can't oversell the impact this has had on our team. It's been great to be able to send unique links for everyone. And it really doesn't take too much work. And you can kind of imagine if there was a list of 10 or 20, it would read, if John Smith, enter that link. If Jane Smith, enter that link. And then you just have more else options until you got to your default there at the bottom.
Shannon, we had a question on this. When you're sending out things like this, by applying unique email in the from address, would that have any impact on deliverability? So if you're sending out something personalized like this from a rep, for example.
Yeah, we found it to be very helpful to tokenize off of that because a person sees it's coming from their rep. And so that's had a huge impact. And I think it looks and feels like it's coming from the rep, which is, for me, a different experience than having like a promo from even a distro or, even more broadly, like a large, leadership or distro list.
I think just to add to that, your mileage will vary depending on your audience. And I know I've said that to basically every question, but it's really true coming from the cybersecurity world. I know we had a homegrown solution at a previous company that would help us identify if an email was like looking like someone but wasn't sent from the IP that was expected. Now, if you've set up SPF, DKIM, all of that correctly, it shouldn't have an effect. But again, you want to understand your audience. If they are very, very, very serious about cybersecurity, it might be better to just have one email that you send from. But again, it's your mileage will vary depending on your audience.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Chiara.
Thanks.
Great info. And something else that I'll call out here is that, beyond the open rate, once they were in it, we were seeing a lot of traction here with the click-through. And so we were seeing that people were clicking the links. And so we wanted to see how well they were performing, how, much people trusted or more interested in the content. And so we've set up a tracking program that tracks how many meetings are actually booked through these individual email programs to attribute the MQLs back to them. This is a little more involved. I had to play around with the velocity script a little bit more and make some edits to the send campaign, but would be interested to hear if people would like to see like a blog post or something like that on that, because I can get a little more in depth and show you how you can create like a Salesforce campaign with those statuses that sales can see and mark it into like Marketo sales insights in Salesforce. So just better way to make visual the MQLs being generated from these book of meetings. So we're going to provide another example here from Appfolio, and this is another one of my favorite pet projects from the customer side, and it is using something we like to call custom links. Appfolio is so fun in that we have a platform that people get to log into, and so I get a little bit of visibility from the customer side into what that in-app experience looks like, but I don't have a ton of control over how to drive to it. It's something that, we have a lot of goals around. How do we drive in-app engagement? For customer, we have different added services that we want to promote. So we have pages dedicated to a lot of resources and like well thought out flows to get demos of those and explain how they work. And I can send content on them through emails, but I was a little stuck on how to actually get them in app and do that through a Marketo email. So we designed this process, which enables people to go to their login to get an app. So what we do is we create a unique link using a token that we've claimed that we've named custom database link. And what it does here, you can see in the top image here, what we're doing is we're sending customers to specific web pages within their portal through their dedicated login. And we're doing that by leveraging custom object fields. So that first line of code, you can see it says set, and it says in pink, custom database link. And then we're going to tell it what we want that token to read as. So the bottom line is going to format it as HTTPS, and then we're going to insert the link we're creating. So the first piece of it is we want to make it unique to the person. So if it's my company, let's say I'm Shannon and my company is the MacQuarrie group, we have an identifier in our custom object on the Salesforce database for the vhost plain value would read MacQ in my case. And that's how I'm distinguishing that it's my unique login, is that MacQ piece. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert that before .appfolio.com and then / wherever we're sending them. So if we just kept it as .appfolio.com, that would just send them to their login. That's a win. But what we want to do is we want to go a step further and send them to a specific page for whatever we're promoting, so that in that email we're saying, hey, check out this add-on tool. Here's a little bit about it. Here's why we think that this would be great for you. Here's a link to read about it where you can request a demo in-app where we've already dedicated those resources. And so what happens now is it's going to pull in that MacQ value from my vhost plain, and it's going to plug it in, and it's going to create a full link, which you can see in the arrow. It's going to create HTTPS, /macq.appfolio.com /awesome webpage with missing an E, but awesome webpage. And so one thing I wanted to call out here is there is a great resource from last year's summit that Chiara did. It gets way in depth on custom objects, which this kind of glazes over to explain that you can use them to build these links, but I recommend we'll get the PDF version of this slide so you guys can see it, but recommend giving that a watch because that'll tell you how actually to get into the depths of utilizing fields like that. Something else I wanted to call out for this example is something that I experience, and I hope not everyone does, but I feel like we do, is issues with duplicate values. So when I go to preview values like this, I make sure to use the list preview function because the different values are going to change if there's 2 records for one email address. So if I have 2 Shannon records, maybe one is MacQ and maybe one is, the Marie group. My middle name. So for this, we'd want to make sure to either use the uploaded list, static list that we're using, or we want to take that smart list we're sending to, add it to a static list and preview. And this is a big part of our QA process to make sure that each link is changing as we're previewing through different records, and also checking that default value, because in this case, if our default value, if it was empty, it would break the link. In others, we'd have a default value plugged in, but since we need the vhost plain here to make the link work, it would break. And so it's good to keep in mind so that you can set up the campaign to say not send if that value is empty. So those are some good things to keep in mind if you want to create a link like that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about email reporting and that specific action plan.
So, yeah, I'll start off here. So the first thing I want to call out is email metrics are super important, right? You need to be able to understand where you're losing people so that you can improve. However, email metrics don't belong in marketing attribution, in my opinion. And I think, I know a lot of others share this opinion as well. So, Marketo even does not recommend even changing program statuses for opens anymore. We learned this in our last Marketo audit that we worked with them on. Because it is so unreliable, because there are, email checker softwares that look like an open that aren't an actual open, and all these different things. That's not a reliable metric anymore. However, it is consistent in its unreliability. So you can still compare emails against each other, and you can still benchmark against, okay, I improved my open rate by X% by doing Y. And so you can still use them to share your wins internally. But again, we shouldn't be using them for attribution because it's just not, a valid measure. That said, within Marketo, we have a lot of options for how we can look at emails. So first of all, we have the email performance report. Now, this is probably where you'll spend most of your time when you're looking at emails. This is going to give you, the amount sent, the amount delivered, percentages of that, how many opens, clicks, click to open ratios, all of that. And so that is where I generally spend a lot of time looking at, like, okay, we made this change on this date. I'm going to update the dates in this report to look at what changes, what changes we had in our metrics. Then we have the email link performance report. This is another really important one to call out because when you're looking at that email performance report, a click is not just a click to your main CTA. It could be a click to any link in your email. And so that's a really important thing that you want to look at which links are performing the best as well. Because if you've got, a massive click rate, but then your top link is like privacy policy or something along those lines, maybe that's not great. So that's another one that you want to keep a really close eye on. Lastly, we also have the engagement stream performance report. So this is basically an email performance report, but it has all of your emails broken down by the stream that they're in within an engagement program. So this can really help you when you're looking at your nurtures, seeing where people are falling off, where you might want to be updating some of your content, etc. The last one I really want to call out here is the email insights report. This is its own widget. So when you click into it in Marketo, it opens a new web page. This is not going to be what you use to present wins to leadership, but it is a really cool way for you to explore some data that's not super easy to run reports on directly within the UI. It allows you to see, what people are looking on, right? Device, whether it's tablets, phones, desktop, etc. What OS they're looking at it on, their inferred geos, all of those sorts of things. And so that's really key. It can help you understand where the majority of your people are coming from so that you can kind of optimize your templates for that. But it'll also help you understand, okay, we had like not as many people come to us from Android, for example, but the ones who do like aren't clicking at all. Maybe there's something off with how the email is rendering for Android. That's where you bring in a litmus, an email on acid, all of those to kind of look into your template and understand, is it working for that OS? So I don't the email insights report is not the be all end all of anything, but it does give you some metrics that are harder to find directly within Marketo at scale. So I like to call it out as a cool place to look for just some more in-depth data. And now I'll pass it back to Shannon to talk about reporting some more.
Thanks, Chiara. Okay, so talking about reporting our email metrics. So I think a great place to start out here, there's only so much stake we can put in our benchmarks, but of course we want something to compare ourselves against, right? There are some general rules of thumb when it comes to unsubscribe rates, but open and click-through rate are going to depend widely on your segment and your industry. When I was going to compile our data, this was something I ran into right away. I was like, well, our customer and prospect segment are going to vary widely. And then real estate tech is probably very different than financial tech, perhaps. And on top of that, B2B and B2C. So I started digging in, just doing a little research on some numbers. And that is what I found. They did vary quite a bit. I averaged some of them and got a good sense of, okay, here's what it seems like our click-through and open rates can be broadly to give us a sense of if we're missing the mark or if we're performing along with everyone else. When I say everyone else, I mean the top performers, of course. So that's the first thing I would suggest doing, is compiling your benchmarks and figuring out what those mean to you. Defining those metrics you're most interested in. So, open, delivery rate, click through, unsubscribe, bounce rates, any and all, and writing those down and figuring out what reporting tool you're going to do to capture your numbers. So for us, I was using Tableau. And if you have another tool you use, I would say if that's something you're very confident pulling, that's great. If not, partnering with analytics is a great option here. That's what I did. I created a report and I said, okay, here's how I've done it. Here's how it's formatted. Does it get your seal of approval? Great. Yes. Okay. And so something I did from there, number 3, is I compared our metrics to see where we needed to grow. I did take a look at outliers. I'll just note here that you want to note anything you're going to remove. So if you had, like a really odd bot activity on an email that skewed you too high on certain things or skewed you low on others, call those out and make sure that they make sense to remove. But, you want to be using numbers that are reflective of how you're actually performing. And cross-referencing those with analytics is helpful as well, I'd say. And then determine your gap. Maybe your unsubscribe rate is doing great, but your open rate needs some help, and just kind of, star what you want to be focused on. And then from there, we're going to dig in. We're going to take that one step further and we're going to say, okay, is it our, delivery rate? Is this something server reputation needs to be checked? Open rate? Are we going to be looking at our subject line and pre-header? Or are we going to dig into one of the many link slides and figure out how we can drive engagement through customization? So on top of that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can make that plan. Something I found really helpful is the SMART goals. So specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant and time bound. The most important part for me here is the time bound. I think, you get these numbers, you identify your gap, but depending on how big that gap is, you're going to need to set some different time frames for solving that and working towards it. For engagement, maybe you need a little more time because maybe you need to think up the strategy and what links you're going to be customizing and build out some stuff that maybe takes more work on the front end, but will definitely pay off in the long run. Or maybe it's something a lot easier and you have a couple things you need to set up and you know that you needed to do a little more work on your server reputation. And once those are crossed off, you can start to perform better there. So that's going to be part of step 2 as well, is identifying your strategies. You're going to figure out where you're dropping off and make a list. I make a bullet list of all the things I want to try, determining what teams you're going to partner with to get those done. And you're going to implement. You're going to practice your good list hygiene that we spoke of, maybe get your global form validation set up, A/B testing either copy for that engagement or your subject line for that open rate, getting your pre-headers installed, and all the customization you could want for your tokens, snippets, etc. This is another thing where I think partnering with analytics was really helpful for me. So I told them, okay, this is the report that I have built. Here are the numbers I'm seeing. I'm going to be pulling this every quarter for the next, time horizon. Is this good? And how can I kind of, make this easier to pull? So removing any friction there to really check in on your goals. And so whether that's, a slidable timescale or a report that can be regenerated, I thought that was a really helpful way where when things get busy and you're still wanting to work on these initiatives, but you haven't, you're not as focused on getting the project going. Nice, easy way to keep checking in on how those are performing. So your next steps, and really our big goal here, is so that you can have one of the experiences that I was lucky enough to have, which was reporting such amazing metrics to the leadership team. You've hopefully had a list of things you wanted to implement. Maybe you already have a list of all this great stuff you're working on and stuff you want to continue to try. And you can highlight and say, here is where we started, and here's where we are, and here's our action plan to move forward. So I hope that there was lots of great stuff in this presentation that gave you some skills and opportunities to work on all that. And I want to say a huge thank you to Chiara, because without Chiara, I would not be at this presentation. And I'm so glad I got the chance to speak with you guys today.
Thank you so much, Shannon. That was Awesome. Thank you for all of the work that you did on that. We don't have a ton of time for Q&A, but feel free to message us on LinkedIn if there's any questions you have. Also, if you're going to Summit, please, if you felt like you learned something here, join me at my session with Ajay Sarpal. We will be talking about a lot of the stuff we talked about here in greater detail, like dynamic content and snippets, but also some more operational stuff like lead scoring and things like that. So I think there's a good amount of audience crossover. And yeah, thank you so, so much.
Thank you both. This was wonderful. We appreciate it very much. We did have one quick question, was if there's any organizations whose industry benchmarks are what you use as your standard when you're reporting against in your org.
I can't speak for the whole org. I know when I did my research, I was looking at there was some great resources online for going by industry. So I had taken a look at that and I looked at B2B and then I looked at real estate specific. I'm sure our competitor team does have metrics that they measure against. Chiara, I'm not sure if you have any specifics that you know about.
No, I think also a lot of like what you'll see online, make sure to look at a date because this stuff is constantly changing, like a date that it was published. So something else I like to do if you have like partner companies and you know the MOPS person there, talk to them about what theirs looks like and just have a frank conversation with them. I think nothing really replaces kind of the knowledge sharing. That's why we're here on this Zoom today, right? So I think that's also helpful. But yes, the companies that share online and all sorts of benchmarks like that are helpful.
Awesome. In addition to using Marketo's reporting, any insights on using Google Analytics to also gauge email performance, or do you solely rely on Marketo's reporting?
So we use Tableau. Google Analytics is not owned by our team, so I can't speak to using that for email. We use it largely for digital and top of funnel things. I don't know if anyone else on the call has insight into that.
We use it a little bit because we require the use of UTM parameters on all of our literally everything. And so we'll sometimes use what comes over into Google Analytics based on UTM parameters to kind of see where, if we've got specific landing pages or something like that that we're using across multiple channels where the views are coming from. And that way we can see where what's coming from email versus what's coming from paid ads or partner newsletters or things like that.
Love it.
Any other questions? You're welcome to come off mute too, if that's easier than typing something out. No? Awesome. Well, that puts us right at time. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone who was able to join us today. We really appreciate it. Hope to see you at a future mug. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the beautiful weather if where it's as wonderful as it is in Chicago today. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.